everyone, and welcome to Everyday Guardians, a special series of the Better Satellite World podcast, brought to you by Space and Satellite Professionals International, SSPI. I'm Tamara Bond Williams, Executive Director of SSPI. Everyday Guardians is where we meet the people who are protecting our shared future in space. This series is part of our 2025 topic campaign, Securing the Future of Space, where we speak with the people working across government, industry, and scholarship to build a more resilient, sustainable, and secure orbital environment. Today's episode is called Space Habitat for Humanity, and our guest is Marshall Smith, President of Space Solutions at Voyager Technologies. Marshall currently leads the development of Starlab, a commercial space station designed for science, industry, and international partnership. He also serves on the Starlab board and previously shaped Voyager's technical strategy as Chief Technology Officer. He began working on commercial space stations at NanoRacks, which was later acquired by Voyager. Before entering the private sector, Marshall spent 37 years at NASA, where he led human exploration and systems engineering programs and helped launch key commercial partnerships, including the Human Landing System. This episode is part of SSPI's Securing the Future of Space campaign, sponsored by the American Space Exploration Fund. We also thank our corporate partners, Access Intelligence, publishers of Via Satellite Magazine, Hughes and EchoStar Company, Clyde and Company, providing legal guidance across the aerospace sector, and again, the American Space Exploration Fund, underwriters of this series. And so with that, I'm just going to jump right in. Marshall, welcome to Everyday Guardians. How are you?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Well, I'm very happy to be here. This has been an ongoing conversation. We're going to be having this conversation all year. We're really grateful. Just to give you some framework, the American Space Exploration Fund, formerly known as the Children's Space Shuttle Trust Fund, so I think that frames the conversation a little bit, is underwriting this series. And so, they have a real deep interest, obviously, in the question of space safety. And so that we're coming at it from that angle. And I just wanted to kind of give you that background as we talk about what this idea is of being an everyday guardian. But let's jump a little bit into your journey and where you are today, right? So you've spent all this time working on human space flight systems, and now you're working on designing a commercial space station, one that will host researchers, entrepreneurs, maybe even tourists. What's different about that? And what does it mean to design a commercial space station that's for everyday people?
Yeah, so looking at where we are, ISS is a great, phenomenal piece of scientific engineering and engineering science and engineering activity, and it's really a fantastic system. But it was designed for government astronauts, for the most part, to go up and conduct research and science activities to understand how humans react in space. What does the space environment do to us when we spend long duration time in space and those types of things. It was also a vehicle that was used to help with diplomacy as well. It's actually made up of 5 different countries that are working together, and that's been very successful. When you start talking about private space stations, then we start looking at, okay, where's the market? What is of interest to industry and who would be willing to pay for this kind of work? Obviously, we'll still continue to support governments and government activities, NASA, ESA, European Space Agency, NASA, of course, everybody knows that, and JAXA and the Japanese Space Agency and many other space agencies that are out there, Canada as well. I could go through the whole list. They all have interest in going, and we want to continue to serve that market. But we're talking about other things like pharmaceuticals and biosciences and those other types of things, or even chip manufacturing and other kinds of capabilities that have been limited in the past by what you can do on the ISS because the ISS is a government institution, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, if you're a private business, and you go up to use the ISS, there's limitations to what you can use on the intellectual property, the IP, and those types of things. When you're dealing with a commercial space station, then the opportunity is wide open as to what kind of deal you can make, how to go do that research and things like that. So we're looking to see the kinds of work that goes on to a commercial space station like Starlab to be much greater than the opportunities that were available to, say, work on the ISS. Um, we have been already selling our space for research and development as we
Mm-hmm.
move forward, as well as looking at crews. Obviously, crews from governments are big, but also private folks can go too, or companies that are actually want to send their researcher up to go do the particular work can do that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for kind of walking us through what that transformation looks like. It was those researchers that were in mind, right? Because I know a little bit about some of the value of being in low gravity environments to research. And so I expect that we're going to see a lot more scientists um, taking advantage and private companies taking advantage of the research capabilities that a commercial space station might provide. When you're thinking about that, though, I imagine that some of the things that you're working on now, it's like, how do we maintain this thing in space? Who services it? What if a part breaks? I imagine that you're thinking that through too, and that's some of what also Voyager is working with.
Yep, absolutely. So we're offering the whole capability, the whole lock, stock, and barrel, if you will. We will own and operate the station.
Hmm.
We will contract for services for crew and cargo services from the folks that have already demonstrated their capability to do that, like SpaceX and Boeing. And obviously, there's crew capabilities out there. There's a number of new cargo capabilities, a number of new cargo capabilities coming online as well that will increase competition and help service our space station as well as others that may be up there in the future.
Hmm.
Um, so, we have to design, basically everything that's happening to now for the ISS, we have to have the same kind of capability. We have to be able to launch crew and cargo. We have to be able to service it. We have to operate it. We have to fly it. Um, deal with the astronauts on a day-to-day basis. All those things. So it's basically repeating in a much more cost-effective manner the activities that currently happen today on the International Space Station.
Yeah. So let me just step a little bit back into this idea of the entire ecosystem, right? So you've got a space station, you've got people who have good reasons, commercial reasons mostly, to be up there. Like you said, you've got to launch them up there and so forth. And you're building all of that capacity within Voyager itself. As you think about what that whole ecosystem looks like, are you envisioning that different space stations might be communicative with one another and that's also part of the ecosystem, or is the idea that Starlabs is going to be really very, very self-contained?
Well, each space station has to be self-contained for the crew and what's going on. I mean, space is counter to what you might see in the
It's Star
movies
Trek.
where, yeah, where people are beaming around, or in this case, flying from one station to the other. That's actually pretty hard to do, depending upon where the stations are located and the
Hmm.
fuel that you have to have and things like that. So the stations have to be somewhat independent. Obviously, um, there's opportunities for integration with other players out there as they come online, and with ISS, how do we move things from ISS to, say, our station or other stations? How do we collaborate? Those are all open topics that could be explored as we move forward.
Yeah. In the process of thinking through a commercial space station, do you find the work environment similar to or very different from what you did with NASA in terms of building ISS? I guess you said, well, we're doing things in a more cost-effective way, and like as we all know, governments are very risk averse, right, by nature. And so they tend to be, you have to have redundancies and redundancies and redundancies in order to do anything. Is that different in the commercial environment? And then how do you plan for safety that's still cost effective?
Yeah. So just because to make something safe doesn't mean it has to be expensive.
Mm,
We do a lot of the same, if not all of the same kinds of approaches that we would do for ISS or a launch vehicle or anything else like that. We go through risk analysis. We make sure we understand exactly what the issues are with a particular problem or issue that we're dealing with or design, and we go through and we figure out what's the best way to make sure that the crew stays safe. Safety is our number one priority.
mhm,
Um, I think what it gets to is how we operate the station is going to be where you save a lot of money. Instead of a standing marching army, maybe we can do with a lot less people involved, taking advantage of advances in computer systems and AI to monitor non-flight critical systems and things like that. I think all of those make a huge difference in the overall cost of flying and operating the station and preparing. We're using AI, for example, to deal with logistics. For example, at NASA, it takes quite a while to lay out the logistics for a cargo flight. And if you have a change in logistics, you have to go through somewhat of a procedure to go change out and repack and do all this other stuff. Well, AI can make that process much, much faster. And the same is true with operating the crew day. It takes a lot of people to plan out what the crew is going to do on a daily basis and lay it out every day that they're up there. Whereas we can use other capabilities and drastically cut that time down. And so these are the kinds of things that are really enabling private stations to be much more cost effective, not compromising on safety. That's not what we're doing there. We're not building something cheaper necessarily, but what we're doing is doing it in a way that makes design sense and cost effective without compromising safety.
yeah. And you have an advantage because you're building fresh, right? A lot of what NASA is doing and has done is building on legacy systems and then upgrading. So you have the ability to take a fresh look at it.
Sure. I mean, we are designing for maintainability from the beginning and reliability and operations and those types of things. Not saying that NASA didn't do that because I was there. You do that as well. But you learn a lot, and we've been operating the ISS for 20 years, and there's a lot of lessons learned that we can now take and roll into a new station.
You are listening to The Better Satellite World, the longest running continuous podcast in the commercial space and satellite industry. The Better Satellite World podcast is funded by the corporate partners of SSPI, Hughes, Access Intelligence, and the American Space Exploration Fund. Have you heard about SBQ? Space Business Qualified is a popular online learning program for industry professionals designed by JSOA, SSPI, and SatProf. To learn more, visit spacebq.org. Every quarter in August and November, join SSPI and the New York Space Alliance for the next New York Space Business Roundtable. And join us on September 30th for Call or Raise, Your Bets on Sovereign Space. If you want to get inside the industry's biggest issues and investments, meet startups and high-profile industry leaders from around the world. The Roundtable is the real New York event you cannot miss. To register, visit sspi.org/events. And now back to the Better Satellite World.
Do you think that you currently have the regulatory environment in place to successfully manage this in-space environment, or is there a lot more work to be done?
Well, that's a great question. There's certainly more work to be done, and it is in process. the whole industry, needs to come to terms with, and the government and the regulations, is how do we manage private space stations? That's not really addressed per se. It's kind of an open area. But the good news is it's being worked on. I have no doubt that it will be resolved, by the time this happens in time. So anyway, there's definitely room to be worked in that area, and it's in process.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very curious about it because, like you said, ISS is, of course, a treaty entity, right? It's an
That's right.
agreed upon entity where there are rules laid out as to how the governments are going to work with one another. Private entities really, they're open for business, but I don't know that we yet have the policy background to make it okay, and not run into obstacles that you wouldn't have if you were working the ISS. And it's one of the biggest challenges I think that we face is getting the policies piece lined up so that commercial businesses can be as amazing as they can be,
Right. And I mean, some of the things that, like you're talking about, like codes of conduct, for example, if you're going to fly somebody or they want to fly, then they have to sign up to codes of conduct. And it's similar to what's written into the IGA and other agreements that are between countries. I mean, you have to have that at a business level as well. So those are things that have to happen. But then from a regulatory perspective, what are the rules if something happens? Who's responsible? Is it, if there's multiple nationalities on the station? Those types of things. How does that affect? Who's in command? All of these things are things that need to be discussed and laid out.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for going there. One of the things that we've been talking about throughout this series is just this human element that I think gets less talked about than it should. And I'll just lay this out this way, right? So, of course, I think about when I go into any place that I'm not familiar with, or I'm going to a place that I'm going to, I think about how do I get out of this place if I need to? Like if there's an emergency, if somebody's not treating me well, what is my exit plan? And I think that certainly, I think that's a habit of thought for women. And it's a natural thought in any kind of new environment, right? And when I think about space, one of the things that came up in one of our earlier interviews is just that there's an inherent power dynamic, right? You're in a place where you were sent by companies with lots of authority over you because they're paying your salary. There's a lot of money invested in your being there, and it's a closed environment that you can't easily leave. And so you start thinking about, well, how do people navigate the human relationships in this place where you're going to be for a little bit of time? And is that thought process going into thinking about engagement on commercial space stations?
Yeah, absolutely. We think about the human aspect of this quite a bit. Matter of fact, one of our partners is Hilton Corporation. And, if you go look at the ISS, for example, it's kind of an austere environment. It's designed by engineers for engineers, I like to say. And, and we want to make this a better experience for folks, because it is hard to be trapped in a small container, if you will, in the vacuum of space, and that has some psychological effects as well. So, we want to make sure that the crew is comfortable, and so Hilton is partnered with us. We also have some other things that are in work to also improve that situation. We have medical staff that's involved, and we think about crew. How the crew lives and works on the station. How do they enjoy their time off? Because everybody has to have some time off, and we want to make the environment as palatable as possible, and a very positive experience for the crew members as they go up. I mean, let's face it, you're going to space because you really want to go to space. Most people are quite happy to be there, and they put up with a lot. But we would like to put up with a lot to be a lot less, if you will, if you get my drift there.
I do. Yeah. Well, I'm deeply, deeply impressed with the idea that Hilton is engaged with you on this level, because that's pretty cool. It just seems to me that it's a very cool thing to think about these very terrestrial uh, companies getting that opportunity to think about, okay, well, how do I take this business model to space?
Yeah, I mean, Hilton is, you can go back and see ads in the 60s where they had their own space station with they would call the Conrad Hilton or something like that. So they're very interested in how does this apply to tourism and other things like that as we move forward. Obviously, that may be soon. It might be a little bit further out, but as space gets more affordable, then you're liable to see more opportunities.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Well, if you can do just one more question, I'll just ask this. Um, so as you think about the entire in space environment, not just the space station, but the whole ecosystem that will make a space station successful, right? What do you think is a big blind spot that we should have our eyes on and we maybe don't as much as we should?
So that's an interesting question. Honestly, what's interesting about that is we've been up and operating. We, as in governments, have been up and operating in space for quite a while. 20 years. Industry knows pretty well what needs to be done and how to do it. It's just a matter of putting it together and testing it out and making sure that it's ready to go. I don't really think there's a lot of blind spots out there. I think we're very confident and understand the things that need to be done. The whole chain already exists. It's just being run by the governments right now. The question is, how do we turn that into the private side? I would say what's probably more interesting is, the previous quote commercial unquote activities that were done by NASA, for example, commercial crew, commercial cargo, those types of things, were mostly paid by the government, almost 90%. That's not the case for the CLD program, which is Commercial LEO Development Program. It's mostly paid by private investors because there's obviously a return on something like this. So I think probably the hardest thing to deal with is making sure that that investment is there and that we're moving out and we have the commitments that we get from the government, those types of things. So those are all very important. It's not the actual technical work that's really the harder part. It's getting the commitments. It's the legislation. It's the agreements that we were talking about earlier. How do we get the regulatory environment set up? Communications. How do we get the frequency spectrums and making sure that those things happen quickly and easily? Getting the working issues with the FAA to make sure we have launch criteria and those types of things. All of those things are probably a bigger challenge than, say, how do you build a space station?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right, right? I know you're right. The technical aspects of building, we're actually quite good at, having said that, I will point out that, we thought fairly recently about the need to have spacesuits that fit women. Like that was a recent development. Like, oh, gee, these are not built for women at all. And I think too, back to this idea of who are we building for? People who are trained to be astronauts versus people who are going up there because they have other kind of training and they're not trained to be astronauts. Um, what does a spacesuit look like for them? I mean, I'm sure it looks similar, but I'm also sure that it has to have a great deal more flexibility just because they're people and not trained to be astronauts. And so these are some of the things that just kind of fly through my brain every now and then, like, I don't want to walk around that big clunky thing.
Yep.
So,
No, I wouldn't either.
so,
Absolutely, I wouldn't
yeah.
either. But I will tell you that spacesuits and spacewalks are great. Matter of fact, the ISS is designed with maintenance requirements to be done on the outside, and
Mm-hmm.
that's requires lots of spacewalks. And of
Yeah.
course, the suits are tailored for the crew members, but there's only certain sizes and things like that, and they have to vary them. And anyway, it's something that's being worked on. I know suits are in design and development now. That's great, but our model is to build a large space station. It's very large in diameter, such that we don't have to do maintenance on the outside. And we're not planning for any spacewalks. We do not want to do spacewalks. Anything that's outside will be robotically maintainable, which we're going to have a robotic arm, which will be servicing external payloads and those types of things. But we will have a contingency, an emergency contingency thing if we had to get out there and do something. But there's nothing critical on the outside of this vehicle that requires a spacewalk, and that's a huge difference, because spacewalks are inherently the most risky thing that we do in space. Period.
Yeah.
And also extremely expensive. So when you're trying to build a commercial a space station, to put an airlock and a suit so somebody can go out and walk around, you need to have a reason to do it. And sure, there is the logical reason that somebody says, oh, well, we might want to train somebody who's going to go to the surface of the moon, but the environment is totally different. It's an unpressurized environment, but when you're on the moon, you're walking in partial gravity, other things like that, which you can simulate on Earth, probably in a vacuum chamber, just about as easily as you could do it in space. In other words, all you would get to be exposed to vacuum in space. That's probably not enough reason to spend billions of dollars for crew capability.
Yeah. Well, see, thank you. And that is a thing that I did not know, and now I do. So thank you so much, Marshall. That was really, really helpful. Well, I really appreciate you being here. I have high hopes to be having more conversations with Voyager in the future, and I thank you for helping us understand a little bit more about what our future is getting ready to look like.
Yeah, happy to do so. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. You've been listening to Space Habitat for Humanity, a new episode of Everyday Guardians, a podcast series from Space and Satellite Professionals International. Everyday Guardians is part of SSPI's Securing the Future of Space campaign and fits within the Better Satellite World track of the SSPI podcast. The campaign is made possible by the American Space Exploration Fund, and we thank them for sponsoring the series. We also thank corporate partners Access Intelligence, Hughes, and Clyde & Company for making all that we do at SSPI possible. New episodes of the SSPI podcast, including Better Satellite World, Space and Satellite Futures, and SSPI Wise's She Reaches tracks, are released every Monday. Subscribe at SSPI.org/SSPI-podcast or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, really wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also catch us on YouTube at SSPI Video, all one word. For Space and Satellite Professionals International and our producer, Ari Yates, my name is Tamara Bond-Williams. And for the people and companies building a space and satellite future worthy of our highest aspirations, thank you for all you do.